Hello and welcome back to the Reaper. So we've recently done a video on air-to-air missiles. Now we're going to go and do one on air-to-ground missiles. So first of all, I should say the precursor to air-to-ground or guided air-to-ground missiles was basic fire unguided rockets, which are still used today and are still very effective. And that dates back from pre-World War II with single pylon launch unguided rockets to more modern salvo launch rockets from rocket pods and whatnot. But what we're interested in here is the addition of guidance, so air-to-ground guided missiles. Okay. Well, first I should say that there are hundreds of different types and models of air-to-ground guided air-to-ground missiles in the world. We can't go over all of them because it would just take forever. And I should see, I'll put a little picture up here. Showing the ones that we have in our simulator, which is DCS World. We've got about 70. Or just over 70, and about a third of them we can actually use in our flyable planes. So we've picked the most interesting ones and the main variants that we're actually going to go through in this slideshow. So we're going to have the Bullpup to begin with. We're going to have, and some of them are in, that we're covering, some of the variants are in DCS and usable and some are not, but just to give you a bit of history. Bullpup, and we're going to have the Kerry, we're going to have the RB04, we're going to have the Maverick, the Karam, the Kedge, the Sidearm, the Alarm, the Kelter, the Harm, the RB15 and the BK90. And I should say we've got our very kind Davros who's put the information together, who will be helping us out. So let's move on to the first one. Bing. Right, so what do we know about this, the Bullpup?
The Bullpup's the big daddy of them all. It was the first workable air-to-surface missile, liquid propelled, so quite difficult to fuel up and get going, and developed for the Korean War, back all the way back in the 50s, and then actually had service into the 70s and the 80s with different air forces. It was a bit of help from the Germans. Hence called HS-293, people might have heard about, which is a glider bomb with a big rocket underneath it. That took down several ships back in World War II before the Germans ran out of materials to build it. So the Bullpup was really a logical development of that idea.
Roger, so this was the first generation of guided air-to-ground missiles then?
Certainly the most effective they had up to then. Up to then it had been dumb bombs, A4s, F4s, Sky Raiders, smashing dumb bombs into bridges and structures that they need to take down, not having much success, getting shot down in the meantime, and the pilots got fed up and said, give us something better. And
my understanding is it's a radio-guided missile, so essentially you'd have a big flare at the back for visibility, and you'd guide it with a joystick from the cockpit. Yeah,
I've seen you fire these in videos off the Viggen. Or something very equivalent, which is the RB05, which is a Swedish variant of this, if you like. We'll look at the Russians in a second. But the RB05 is exactly the same, i.e. joystick-controlled, radio-controlled missile. Pop it off. You have to fly somewhere near to the target because you need to be able to see the target still, but you're using the flare literally to pinpoint it onto the target. Good hand-eye coordination required, I should imagine. Joystick for the aircraft, joystick for the missile. Keep an eye on where the aircraft's going, keep an eye on where the missile's going at the same time. Interesting times.
And do we have out of interest, a rough range on these missiles? I mean, the first thing we can say, obviously, is that it has to be within visual range, because you have to see it. So it's not going to go more than a few miles or be useful for more than a few miles.
Yeah, so the Americans thought, well, 10 nautical miles is about the edge of the nautical visual range, so 7 to 10 nautical miles is what they head for, and that's what they got out of this in range.
Okay, well, anything else to add to the Bullpup?
Yeah, they slapped on a nuke on it at one point because it still wasn't effective enough.
Of course they did, so a visual range nuke, I can't see anything going on wrong with that. Okay, and who was the country who was pioneering with this? Was this the United States?
Yeah, this is America. And then they flogged it to quite a few people. So the Draken and the Buccaneers of the Drakens had it Norway, I believe that is. The Buccaneers had it for the RAF. The Buccaneer pilots didn't like it. They couldn't launch it low enough for what was at the time, Royal Navy pilots felt they had to fly too high with this to make an effective strike with it. So they went back to their rocket pods.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess so, because from my experience, you do have to be quite high up to kind of get a kind of bird's eye view of the target area. because otherwise, it's useless if you're really low down.
Yeah, I mean, the Buccaneers were used as cruise missile target aircraft, if you like, against the Royal Navy and the Americans for a long, long time, all the way through their service. If you wanted a cruise missile simulator, send a Buccaneer in.
Okay, let's move on. So that moves us on to the KH-66 Grom, or the Kerry. Now, I haven't had a chance to use this yet. I know you can, in DCS, you can launch it from a MiG-21. I'll do that at some point, as soon as I can learn to fly it. So this is the Russian version of the Bullpup, as I understand it. Yeah,
pretty much took them a decade to catch up. The Koreans and then the Vietnamese said, we keep getting these things dropped on our head, and we don't know how they're making them so accurate. So the Russians actually reverse engineered the Bullpup, and this is the Russian beam rider, the Russian radio controlled missile. Little flare in the back, which you can see, just guide it into the target.
So it's the same idea that you're sitting in your MiG-21, you've got a little joystick, and you control it, with your little joystick, like a radio controlled thing.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to somebody like me that you can actually play with two joysticks, effectively two flying objects at the same time, and keep spatial awareness.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Anything else to add to the Grom?
Just that they decided to go the cheap route. They used one of their first anti-aircraft missiles, the AA-3, I think it was, and they just took the body of that, slapped a sensor on the back, made some movable fins for it, wham bang. Only took them 10 years.
Yeah, I just noticed for an air-to-air missile, it's such a fat body, isn't it? Weird air-to-air missiles back then.
They were pretty basic, weren't they?
Cool. Right, Grom. Okay, I shall look forward to using that. Let's move on now. Right, so we're not really doing this in any particular sequence. It's just how we decided to do it. A RB-04. So this is a Swedish anti-shipping missile, and the Swedes at this time in history had a doctrine of anti-shipping in their air force. So I have fired one of these before. Let me see if I can get a picture up of it. Superimpose it. There we go. So it's like a anti-shipping cruise missile with little wings. What do we know about this?
This is quite fun. This was designed just to fly into an area, pick up radar signals, and home in. So as we've seen you do in previous videos, and your pilots do in previous videos, you set waypoints for it to fly to. It flies to them like a little rocket-propelled plane. It then turns on its sensor, its radar seeker, and homes in on the biggest radar emissions it can find.
So radar emissions. So, I didn't realise it was anything to do with radar emissions. So we're talking like a radar... so we're thinking that a ship is emitting radar signals. Is that how it works?
Yeah, most military ships and civilian ships have got surface radars or air radars on. So this thing will work if they've got their radars on. It won't work particularly effectively if they're not using their radars. So we'll look at the alarm a bit later and how we've developed the means to perhaps get around that. But this one needed active radars to be hitting it. It would pick up that radar signal and head towards them.
I'd never really thought about it before, but I didn't realise how the guiding system worked. I didn't realise that it was anti-radiation, so that's interesting. I don't know really how I thought it worked, but in fact, I thought that this thing, the RB-04, had its own search radar inside, but it doesn't. Obviously, it's a radar.
The later version does, but this thing was around from 1962. All the way through to when the Viggen retires in 2005. So the two main versions, the 1960s version, 1970s version was a radar seeker, and then the later version was an active radar, and that leads you on to the RB-15, which has the same seeker head.
Yeah, roger that. And that's one thing to say about all of these missiles that we're covering, is most of them span decades of service, and you've various variants and improvements over the years. But okay, right. Anything to add to the RB-04 at least?
I had a third of a ton of HE blast and fragmentation warhead in there.
That's a whopping thudding warhead then, isn't it? Because it's, I guess, designed to take down a ship at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think 2 or 3 of those in an aircraft carrier, and you're not going to be flying many planes off it, are you?
Roger. And just one thing for my interest, RB, does that stand for robot?
Apparently it does, yes. RB and robot. You keep seeing the terms interchangeably in the documents I've been looking at.
Yeah, I found that on our TAC view we used. It keeps saying robot, and I can never work out why. Okay, fine. Do you want to move? Shall we move on from the RBO4?
Yes.
Right, so let's move on to our next air-to-ground missile. Right, very widely used, very well known, AGM-65 Maverick. Extremely widely used and large service history, but when was it, essentially invented and put into service?
Yeah, over 20 countries using this now. Everybody seems to have slapped it on every plane or even helicopter they can get it on. It's a very useful, as we've seen in DCS many times, missile. Fairly slow, but very, very accurate.
Yeah, I fired it in off Vigans before. Of course, they call it a RB75 or something, but and you can launch it and put your afterburner on and actually overtake it again, which is quite interesting. But it doesn't really need to be fast. It's chasing essentially pretty much static targets on the ground. You usually have a pretty big warhead. It's a big missile, big heavy missile. And different types of seeker head. Could we talk about the different types of seeker head? So there's TV guided, where I'm guessing it literally has a TV camera in the front, and it can guide itself visually, lock on and guide itself visually to a target. And there's IR sensing, so heat sensing. Any other seeker head types that are of interest?
Yeah, I know you love your laser-guided bombs. Well, you can laser-guided Maverick as well. So that's another variant. They do the infrared. The infrared was developed because of West Germany. The electric optical TV works fine until you put some weather in play, or you put night in play. That's when the Russians were likely to attack, so they actually developed an infrared version of it. And then we have a charge couple variant, which is the later version, CH, J and K. Now they've got image recognition. They've got about 3 times the range of the TV. So yeah, they're the latest versions, and they're pretty good.
Roger that. I know in DCS, in our simulator, I'm not much of a ground attack kind of guy, but I've had all kinds of problems using the TV, the older spec TV types. Problems getting them to lock, problems getting them to track. The IR, but the IR ones are absolutely wonderful. Like you said, they pretty much ignore the weather. And thumping great warhead. Yeah,
about 150 kilos, 136 kilos of warhead nowadays. The earlier variants were about a third of that, so they have really upped stats. It's also got a blast penetrator in some of the later variants, so you're not only pushing through a shaped charge, you're actually forming a metal molten slug that smashes through the armour and then spalls inside.
I guess that's another question I have. Are all of these Mavericks anti-armour? Because most of them I see are fired against, in our simulator, are fired against big tanks, heavy armour stuff. I'm guessing that's what they're mainly designed for. Or are there kind of anti-runway versions, or what do you think?
The original ones had literally just shaped charges, so you had a soft explosive that is formed in such a shape that they actually put some molten jet, if you like, of heat straight into a tank. That works fairly well. The E variant was the delayed blast variant, so that's a bunker buster. So you actually get a blast that goes in through first, then you get a penetrator going through, and then you get another blast on the other side when you've actually got into the bunker. And then the FGs, JKs have got the same blast penetration system, but they don't have the delay on it. So because you've only got a shorter amount of armor to get through rather than 2-3 meters of concrete, perhaps.
Roger. And out of interest, do we have an official max? I know there's different variants and whatnot, but do we have an official max range of these missiles? I find about 10 miles if you're up high. And
yeah, again, you're talking to the edge of visuals space, so 10, 12 nautical miles.
Yeah, great missile. Love using them. Love using them in the Vigan. Love using them in the Harrier. If you really want to hit something and make sure it's destroyed, that is the thing to use.
This was the first small missile that you could take up and launch and leave to hit a ground target. Before that, you had to bomb something by overflying it, or your Bullpup types, you're actually guiding it in and you're still around to get shot at. Maverick, stand off, send it in.
Oh, I see what you mean. So this is the first type in development where you could literally just fire it and then turn away and run to safety, basically.
Yeah, as far as I know, it is the first fire and forget first air to surface.
Awesome. All right, anything to add to the Maverick?
Nope.
Right, we shall move on. Ping. So we've got the KH-25 family, the Karen. So my very brief understanding is that it is the Russian response to the Maverick, fire and forget weapon. And my limited use of these, I think, is on the Su-25T, the Sukhoi, and the Ka-50 Black Shark helicopter.
I want to call it the Havoc. NATO reporting name again.
Yeah, Roger. So what do we know about this then?
KH-25, I would have called it the AS-10 Karen. That's the NATO reporting name for it. Interestingly, NATO has a whole bunch of names for things that don't actually link up with the Russian names for things, because very often in the Cold War we didn't know what the Russians were calling them. So make your own name up and keep to it. 1968 this was developed. It took them to 1975 to actually get it up and running. And then they slapped it on all their frontline ground attack planes. And nowadays we're actually, in fact, apparently are running up the Ka-50, but it's a big weapon to have on the side of a
it really is.
Helicopter. It's 4.25 meters long, so about 100. What is it? About 300 kilos. So
wow.
Big helicopter to get that off the ground.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it seems a weird thing to do. I mean, the Mavericks are relatively small and lightweight compared to this, and you can bung 6 of them on an A10, you know. But this problem with it, the main problem I see, is that you can only carry 2 of them on a jet because they're so bloody big, so heavy. I never really got my head around that.
I mean, the Mavericks 2.5 meters, so this is 4.5 meters. So yeah, you are talking, this is twice the size of a Maverick. But then you've got the issues of miniaturization maybe not being a Russian speciality.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything was bigger and more powerful, basically, wasn't it? Okay, so yep, the equivalent of the Maverick, and as I understand it, there was a whole range of Seeker heads and Seeker types for these. Can we talk about the Seeker types, please? Yeah,
my understanding is that the Russians have played this really cannily. They've developed a family, if you like, of Seeker heads, and they whack it onto as many missiles as they can. So this thing comes from everything from the first variant, which again was a beam rider, a radio controlled one, all the way up to the modern one, the SE, which has actually got a satellite inertial system. So you bung in the numbers like we've seen them do on the A10C, and you drop it and it sails away and takes itself to exactly where you told it to go.
Roger. So that's a modern kind of almost sat-nav guided version, but yeah. And these are, from my firing of them, they've got quite a hefty range as well.
Yeah, you're probably using the laser guided variants. So you're lasering from your own platform, firing a laser guided. Range on it is about, well, up to 32 nautical miles. That's a long way for a missile laser to get. The variant starts at about 6 nautical miles. So again, laser guided, you probably got that 10-12 nautical mile range.
Roger, yeah. And like I said, the variant that I've used, I believe, in the Su-25 is the laser variant, where I'm guessing it's one way or another following a laser beam. Any idea if they ever had a TV variant like the Maverick?
Yeah, they've got everything from laser, TV, thermal imaging. They actually have an active radar on this as well. So I can only presume that's probably a sea-based one. So they're putting in a navigation point, fly to that, and then turn your radar on and hit something solid, and let's say dial the number in and let it fly off.
Interesting. Okay, it really was a different design philosophy. So
I love the fact that it spins. That's my this is a cute missile, because it spins. It actually comes out that tube and actually rotates, just like the Vickers comes off the Ka-50.
I wonder why does it do that? Is that something to do with the Seeker type, or just how it flies?
It actually causes problems to the Seeker. They've got to mate a Seeker head to a rotating rocket, which has the warhead and the rocket motor in. But it's to do with stabilization. It's to do with actually getting the range. This thing has a huge speed. It's 1,500 mile an hour top speed, something like 3 times as quick as the Maverick.
Variants that we can use, we've got an L version, I believe, in the Su-25T, and I think the Ka-50 as well. And we've also got an MPU variant, which is an anti-radiation variant, which can seek out and destroy radars, basically. Okay, anything to add to the KH-25?
Nope, I think that's good.
Alright, let's shift ourselves on. So we're next onto the AGM-122 sidearm. Now, my brief understanding of this is it came into fruition during the development of the AIM-9, the Sidewinder. So there was an A, and then there was a B Sidewinder, and then there was a C. And the C essentially well, for few reasons I don't understand, turned into a radar-guided type of missile or anti-radiation type missile, which eventually became the AGM-122 sidearm. We fire this from our Harrier. Other than that, I don't know a lot about it. What do we know?
Yeah, essentially that. It's a Sidewinder AIM-9C, and they basically had a lot of them left over, and they needed a seed anti-radiation missile, so they put a seeker head on the end of the Sidewinder's type variant Cs, and everybody hated them. They were too sharp range, they're quite difficult to use, and yeah, they haven't got a huge warhead either, so they're not that effective even if you get them on target, except the United States Marine Corps, because we know they are brave, big boys who don't mind going into the back end of nowhere with very little kit and still knocking the blazes out of people. So that's who fell in love with them, and they slapped them on both their Harriers and their Cobras, believe it or not.
That's an interesting piece of history, because I fired them from the Harrier, and I have to agree, I found them bloody useless as well. Hard to lock. The locking doesn't seem very logical. Very little guidance information coming back from the missile, so I don't even know what I've shot at. The range is pretty puny. If you want to get more than 4 or 5 miles, you have to launch it right up into the air up high, which you don't want to be doing. And the other thing is, I mean, if we look at that picture down at the bottom left there, you can see it's like a fraction of the size of a tank and a tiny little warhead. And even in DCS, it takes two of these missiles to blow up a medium armoured vehicle. So I always found it strange as a seed weapon.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a precursor to the Harm, but by the Harm came along as this was being developed. Essentially, a 25-pound warhead on this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's probably enough to knock your granny off her feet at a few big distance. But it was autonomous. It plugged in fairly easily to the Harrier. Didn't need an awful lot of systems changing. But yeah, maximum range of 8.5 nautical miles.
Yeah, roger that. Okay, cool. Anything to add to the sidearm?
I think they tried firing them off Apaches in Iraq 1, but not sure on that one.
Roger, cool. Okay, well, let's move on then. That was the sidearm. I should say, what point of history of this? Would we have a date of when the sidearm entered service? Yeah,
1986 to about 1990. So very, very short service life.
Yeah, indeed. That's actually quite late as well, because the AIM-9C that I believe this was a variation of was way back early 60s or mid 60s or something. So that's interesting. That was 2 decades later. My
understanding is the AIM-9Cs have been lying around a warehouse. Somebody said, let's go and use those. We'll make those useful again. So Motorola, in actual fact, did the development work for this.
All right, let's kick on to the next one. Stand by. We've got the Alarm. So what's this? When did it come into history? What it's all about?
This is a British BAE Dynamics with a bit of German overlay on it nowadays. 1986 it came to service, so it's relatively old for an anti-radiation missile. GR4 was a Tornado, F3 Tornado, and the J-22 Oreo, apparently. They used so many in the Gulf War, they actually literally ran out of them, and they had to reopen the factory to make more of them. People loved them.
I was just looking at the pretty picture. So it's fired off like a normal missile, it zooms up high, and then what happens there? It just parachutes down.
Yeah, you can fire it in literally 3 systems. The third system is what you're seeing there. So you launch it into an area that you think has got active surface-to-air missile capability. It loiters. It goes up to a very, very high altitude. It pops the parachute. It senses the radars below it. So people can switch their radars off, they can shift bandwidth, it doesn't care, it keeps an eye on it. When it decides it's got a lock, gets rid of the parachute and hypersonics it just about, this top speed of about 1500 mile an hour, straight down, thank you very much, and then you're going to get 66 kilos of high explosive blast warhead on your head.
How interesting. So this was this method, I'm guessing, was developed because of the target's ability to turn its radar off and avoid being shot.
Yeah, if you go back to the beginnings of seed work with anti-radiation missiles. You talk about something like the Shrike. The Americans were using it. They had to have almost a visual lock on to the radar as well as radar lock on. They had to almost be able to see it. And the Vietnamese and the Russian advisors who were with them used to get see the plane, know it had a Shrike on, turn the radar off. The Shrike would lose lock on the radar and go wild, and a very effective way of actually not getting hit in the head. This thing plays you your own game. You see the missile being fired, or you know there's a missile down there. You think it's gone wild. You've got your radar off. You turn your radar back on. It goes, great, thank you very much. I've seen you now. It can be fired straight away. It can be fired just as a normal anti-radiation missile. It's got a range of about 93 kilometres, about 50 nautical miles. It's an effective, straight-on, direct fire missile. But the special thing about alarm, and nobody else has done it, is this loiter function. You're probably talking drone systems now have got the capability to do that.
Interesting. Okay, anything to add to the alarm? Apart from the Tornado, what other planes, and what US planes have been firing this?
No US planes got hold of this, and that's, I suspect, is why they used the whole stockpile. About 120 missiles were shot in Iraq War, is my understanding. They used the whole stockpile in one conflict. This is now out of production.
So, now we're on to the harm. Now, I believe this is one that we don't have in DCS yet, but we will be getting it soon, I believe, on the FA-18C Hornet. And hence, I don't know a lot about this, so what do you know about it, Davros?
This is just a historical development of the Americans' anti-radiation missile program. Started off with the Shrike, which I believe was based on the old Sparrow missile, which the Hornet's firing now in DCS. That was almost a visual range, get a lock, you could just about lock it onto a radar, get it away, and the radar had to stay on. Same speed as the Sparrow, so it wasn't particularly quick, about 1,200 mile an hour, something like that. So not a very big warhead. So as time went on, people said we can do better than that, and so came along the high-speed anti-radiation missile, which we've got now.
Roger. And what affiliation does this have? Any affiliation to an AMRAAM or a Sparrow, or is it completely separate?
You can see the size of the thing on that picture.
Mm-hmm.
It is a monster. It's almost 4 meters long.
It is big.
It's about 360 kilograms in weight, a third of a ton. It's bigger than your Sparrow. It's bigger than an AMRAAM. You're getting on towards the old Phoenix size.
So I'm guessing this is a non-loiter missile. This is just power. It powers in super fast.
For about £1 million, you get about 1,500 mile an hour out of it. You get 150 kilometre range. You don't need much of a warhead on this. It's so accurate, and it will remember where that radar emission was coming from as well.
Roger. Okay. And the idea behind the high speed, is that to get to the target quickly before it can turn its radar off, I'm guessing?
Couple of things. A, you don't want the radar to go off, so you get to a high speed. That'll make it more accurate. B, it'll remember where the radar was when it went off. But if you're on a mobile radar emitter, you can start moving. So the high speed is to get you there when it's still at the same place.
Oh, firm. So when it remembers where your radar was, is that GPS or is that INS?
Take your pick on different variants.
Yeah, I thought that might be. So as it comes into the 90s, it must have switched from INS to GPS. Okay. That's a really interesting piece of kit. Do we have a maximum range on this? I know this is going to be different with the variants, but...
It's about 150 kilometres, call it 92 miles, 80 nautical miles, something like that. It's a good range, but it's not hitting out to the 200s that the Russian kilter is. Different mission. This is to defend aircraft going into mainly land space, and you can blow back the defences. So instead of having one group of big defences like a naval group, you're now going through a staggered system of SAM networks, so you don't need quite as much range.
Roger. And so this must be launched from modern US planes. You've got it on the F-16 there, we've got it on the Hornet. Any other planes that can fire this? Initially
on the F-4G wide Weasel. That must have been an interesting ride. A not very manoeuvrable aircraft doing a very, very, very awkward job. It goes on the Prowler as well. I don't think that's modelled in DCS. I think a lot of people would enjoy that. It goes on the F-15 Strike Eagles, the F-16s, the F-18s, which we're going to see it on, hopefully. The Tornadoes had it on for a while. The Eurofighter Typhoon can use it, and so can the F-35. Interestingly enough, the F-22 doesn't have it, though.
Yeah, so the first thing I saw about those big fins is how the hell did you get that into a Raptor body? But yeah, okay, fine. Interesting piece of kit. Alright, anything to add to the harm?
Yeah, just a little story. Apparently in the Gulf War, an overzealous wide-weasel pilot thought he was getting locked up by an anti-aircraft gun. Turned out he was actually being locked up by a B-52 rear gunner. Mm-hmm. He actually fired his harm missile at the B-52. The B-52 actually struck the B-52, and it is now named In Harm's Way. So that was the actual encounter.
Wow, did it? So it landed after that then?
Landed, repaired, new missions.
Well, I guess it must have struck the very, it must have gone for the radar source, which must have been at the back, so it must have hit the tip. Well,
yeah, some of the B-52 variants actually have radar-guided cannon at the back with a pilot, with a gunner, and a tiny little radar actually situated in the tail space.
Roger, cool. All right. Anything to add to the harm before we sign off that?
No, don't think so.
Right. Our next missile is the KH-58, or as you've got the AS-11 Kiltar. So my experience is firing this from an Su-25 Tango in DCS, and it's absolutely immense. Huge missile, like nearly as big as the plane itself, and you can fire it at huge ranges, locking on to various radiation sources, so you fire it against SAM sites and whatnot, and it hits every time, and it's just bloody amazing. What do we know about this?
As you say, it's hideous, isn't it, for a radar operator to have one of these coming down your throat. It's 12, 13 feet long. It weighs 650 kilograms, so I should imagine slapping a couple of those on the Su-25 makes it interesting to fly. Mm-hmm. Top speed 3.6. Wow. That's Mach 3.6. Mm-hmm. And 150 kilograms of HE on your head when it actually gets there.
Wow. Right, so we've got the Su-24 here that it says it launches off, and the Su-25 Tango. Do we anything else that carries this missile?
Supposedly the MiG-25. Not familiar with that. And the Sukhoi 30, is it?
Yeah, the Sukhoi 30. I had no idea, but yeah, okay, yeah, that's interesting. And my understanding is that it's guided or locked onto a target with a pod, anti-radiation targeting pod that the mother plane can carry, and that's how the hostile radar is sighted and locked. And that information must be fed through to the KH-58 missile and sent on its way. Now it's an extremely long-range missile as well, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, the pod you're talking about is the Phantasmagoria. Mm-hmm. Probably mangled that, but what a fantastic name. I'd love for somebody to actually work out what that means in Russian. Initially built into the Su-24, I should imagine, for their anti-sea missions. This is a huge range of 120 kilometres when it first came out. It's been developed up to 200 kilometres.
Roger that. So, and as I understand it, basically the higher you can launch this missile from, the further it can go. I did have a chart, but I can't find it now. But if you can get up to kind of like 40,000 feet and launch it, that's when you can get these huge ranges of 200 kilometres or whatever. Yeah,
I mean, you're talking about this beating the old Nike Hercules. That probably had a range of 30, 40 miles. They weren't particularly accurate surface-to-air missiles, but they did have a nuclear warhead on it. So if you had a fleet of bombers coming in, you'd get your kilters out first, try and wipe them out, and then your bombers would get a free run in. You're also taking them up against the United States naval battle fleets, a couple of carriers, cruisers, surface-to-air missiles, flying in your face, F-4 Phantoms with Phoenixes. So again, you've got to have that standoff capability. To get them there, they'd actually, as you say, program them in with a nav system, an inertial system, give them a point to fly to very quickly, turn your radar seeker on, find a big radar output, aim yourself at it, go blow it up.
Roger that, cool. And at what point of history was this? When was this developed and put into service?
Developed in the 70s, comes into service in about 1982 on the Su-24, and then after that, subsequent variants have been put on different planes.
Roger that. Cool. Okay, anything to add to the KH-58 before we move on?
Just that it's probably bigger and better than anything the NATO allies have got.
Yes, definitely. It's a real piece of kit. It really is. There's one... basically, the Su-25T, because of this missile, is so powerful in DCSR simulator that we never let anyone drive it because this missile could just kill anything anywhere, basically. But okay, cool. Let's move on to an RB-15. This is a bit of an awesome... thing. I don't know a great deal about it, but what I knew is that in DCS we can fire it from a Viggen. It's extremely long-range anti-ship missile, and it follows waypoints. I can't remember how the guidance worked, but I'm guessing it's got some kind of a seeker in there. But what do we know about this? Yeah,
this was a homespun Harpoon. The Swedish were going to buy the AGM-84 Harpoon, and for political reasons they decided not to. The range on it's 250 kilometres in the later variants, the Mark III. So I take it you can just fly up, get over the sea, tell it to wander off somewhere with inertia no GPS guidance, and again it'll turn itself onto a radar seeker head, which they nicked off the RB-04 initially, and then it'll find something to go and wander into.
Interesting, and it's got a jet engine in, is that right? It's a cruise missile.
Yeah, it's a cruise missile. It's got a small turbojet. Essentially, it's the RB-04 with a turbojet engine.
Right, okay, because most of these missiles we've talked about so far are, solid rocket propellant motors, one way or another, a bit like a normal rocket. A normal unguided rocket, but this is a turbojet, and presumably that gives it some not speed, but it gives it plenty of range.
Yeah, as I say, 250 kilometres of range, subsonic, just like the Harpoon. So this is, as I say, it's the Swedish knockoff of the Harpoon. As far as I know, it's got no avoidance manoeuvres, which the Harpoon has. It's no ECM capabilities, which the Harpoon has. It's got no terminal pop-up, as they call it, to go from sea skimming to get some height to slam down into a less armoured part of the ship. So possibly cheaper, not quite as effective as the AGM 84. Be interesting to see if DCS do the Harpoon.
Okay, and when was this in history? When was this put into service?
You can go out and buy one of these now if you want to. 1985 to the present day. They started out on the Viggen, they're now on the now in service on the Gripen.
Wow, I'd love to see a Gripen trying to carry something as big as this. They're big missiles, these things, practically the size of small planes. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I should say, what size warheads this mother got?
It's got 200 kilos of warhead. Wow. Blast frag again, because obviously you just want to blow things up when you hit ships. They're not particularly well armoured ships, so you just need a big high explosive. They do have lots of squishy things in them, so you have a fragmentation aspect to the warhead as well, which rips the organic constituents of the ship apart and makes it very ineffective very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, anything to add to this RB-15?
Nope.
Cool, and if I didn't mention earlier, we can fire it from our Viggens, currently in DCS, and pretty cool weapon. Right, let's move on. Okay, BK-90. Now, I haven't fired this yet in DCS. The reason is I don't think that the damage model is quite finished yet in multiplayer, so I'm waiting for them to finish that, and then I'm going to start firing it. It's a really weird looking type of cruise missile, and a really typically Swedish, just a different approach. So I don't know much about it at all, but what do we know about it?
Right, this is Thor's hammer. The BK-90, or the Bomb Capsule 90, bit of a joint development from what I can make out between the Swedes and the Germans. It's not got an engine.
That's interesting. How does it go?
Well, what can Viggens do in DCS that no other plane can do?
Go really fast and really low?
Yeah, so you use the kinetic energy off the Viggen to shoot this out. A range of about 22 miles gliding off the speed of the Viggen that launches it.
Wow. I had absolutely no idea. I assumed it had a whopping great motor at the back of it, but okay. I'm just trying to work out what on earth just stops it falling down like a dumb bomb. It must have some kind of aerodynamics that allow it to fly then, or glide.
It's modelled on a lifting body. So if you go back to the space shuttle, say, that's one of the iconic lifting body designs, all that surface underneath will actually act as a wing. So literally it's surfing a very about just under supersonic speed. It's surfing the air on top of on using the lift from that body.
Wow, what an interesting piece of engineering. So it's got no missile, it's got no motor, it just glides towards the target. So it's going to have some kind of seeking head then. Is it GPS or INS guided, I'm guessing?
It is 1990s technology, so it's actually INS and GPS guided. So again, you put your numbers in, you get up to speed, you launch it, you forget it, you go away.
Roger that. And so you've got a predetermined target for a predetermined point in space for it to hit, basically. And it must have some kind of control, some kind of yaw control and whatnot, I'm sure. It must have movable fins at the back. What about a warhead then?
This is where we get into contentious stuff. There's a little thing called the Convention of Cluster Munitions. So this was taken out of service in 2012 because Sweden signed up to the Convention on Cluster Munitions. This is a gliding cluster bomb. 24 sub-munitions, each are about 5 kilos, HE frag. So this is really sort of an anti-structure, anti-personnel design. Big infantry parcels or lights and buildings you're taking out with this.
Interesting. So you find a bunch of guys and you just launch these BK-90s at them.
Yeah, you can imagine the landing beaches from the Russians having invaded the southern tip of Sweden, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Launch a bunch of these in, that's a world of pain. Okay, well, it shall be interesting to see when it's fully working in DCS multiplayer there. Okay, anything to add to these BK-90s?
They're big boys. They're 600 kilos each.
Wow.
About 3.5 meters long. They're quite wide as well. They're 600 centimeters, about 0.6 meters. That's that gliding body to give them, a meter wide. Quite wide for a missile. So yeah, interesting device. As I say, Moilerhenna or Thor's hammer. I think it's giving the Ruskies a bit of a bloody nose.
Right, so that has concluded our walkthrough of the air-to-ground guided missiles. Now, I think Davros had some stories for us.
Yeah, just some weird things you pick up from reading the books and the pilot notes and the internet over the years. The AGM-12 Bullpup was actually piloted by one chap into a cave mouth from about 6 miles away. Can you imagine a 15-foot wide cave mouth?
Moles.
You're flying your F4, your A4 down there at 400 knots. You're also controlling a missile going at about 600 knots, and he's managing to get it into between the goalposts, essentially. Absolutely amazing.
Did he do the mission? Did it kill whatever was in the thingy?
I would imagine 120 kilos of HE would do you with your day no good at all.
Roger, okay.
Yeah, the Swedish Robot 04. This was on standby to take down the Soviet Navy during a little encounter the Swedish had with them. The Russian Navy had managed to get one of their whiskey submarines in very, very, very close to the Swedish exercise that was going on. The Swedes were trying out a new type of ship and some different radars and stuff. So the Russians had actually put an LM task in. The whiskey had gone in 2 miles into the national waters of Sweden, 12-mile boundary. After 12 miles, you're in international waters. 10 miles, they're inside it, and it ran aground. So they now the Russians now have a submarine running aground, visible to the Swedish. And they go and try and rescue it with a task force of Russian surface force. Swedes didn't really take that out nicely, so they actually had on standby a squadron of Vigans with the RB-04. And it's thought, in actual fact, the threat of those sea-skimming missiles coming at that surface force actually stopped the Russians going into Swedish territorial waters and rescuing their own son. Turns out everybody's okay. They refloated the whiskey. That sailed off after a bit of a tete-a-tete with a Swedish officer they got on board. And the Russians' force went away in the end as well. But the Vigans were on standby, and they were the threat that kept the Russians away.
Cool. That's an interesting piece of history.
The Mavericks got a very early trial out with the Israelis in Syria. Going back to the 1970s, they actually managed to take out quite a large convoy of armoured personnel carriers and tanks very early on, about 74 I think this is. So when the AGM 65 was relatively new. And if you like, the proof of concept was there. That was the Yom Kippur War. So you're going back quite a way there.
And did they retain the Maverick after that?
Yeah, the Israelis have been using Mavericks very effectively ever since.
Wonder. Cool. Video. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found that useful. And from myself and Davros, we'll see you later.